I am I am pleased to be here with my brothers and sisters in all parts of the world in this platform to discuss why we must continue to unite and organize African peoples against racism, against capitalism, against imperialism, against militarism, and to overthrow white supremacy. So thank you for this opportunity. As you said yesterday, all over the world, we commemorated the life of Walter Rodney and his service to the African Revolution and people's dignity and his struggle to unite the Indian and African workers of Guyana, for which he was assassinated. And you rightly pointed out in the global Pan-African movement in North America, on on next Saturday, we will celebrate African youth and Juneteenth together. So this is a moment of heightened political organizing, political mobilizing, and the raising of consciousness. As you pointed out, George Floyd was murdered on May 25th, African Liberation Day. That day has been set aside and celebrated as the day when we remember when Black people have been struggling for dignity. Many of the African leaders are afraid of African Liberation Day, so they call it Africa Day. But they cannot change the history of the struggles of the African peoples. Since the murder of George Floyd on May 25th, people have been rising up in the United States, in 400 communities in the most remote areas of the United States against white supremacy, racism, and the massive protests in the United States of America have brought solidarity from all parts of the world in every corner. And yesterday, in discussing Walter Rodney in Jamaica, we were pleased that the African Union has made a very clear statement on the killing of George Floyd. And we call on the African youth in all parts of Africa to mobilize, educate themselves again about white racism in the United States of America. The President of the United States of America and the Trump administration, in response to the militarism, they have called on the military and they've called on the military to dominate the streets. The Trump administration followed up by calling in the military into the urban areas and the National Guard. Now, this uprising has affected every institution in the United States of America, whether it is the university, the foundation, the sports arena, and the military. It is especially important the impact of this uprising on the military of the United States of America. Because although the chairperson of the Joint Chiefs of Staff joined with President Trump to march and move the young people out of Lafayette Square on June 1st, a week later, he apologized for marching with the President of the United States, his commander in chief. But the chairperson of the Joint Chief of Staff did not apologize because of his love for Black people or because he opposed white supremacy. He apologized because they are afraid of the rising consciousness in the military among Black, brown, and progressive white people. And they are afraid that the military in the United States will split and there will be a civil war. The United States president has already given signal to this direction by promising to invoke the 1807 Insurrection Act. So while the president of the United States has no legal basis for invoking the 1807 Insurrection Act. The fact is that it is part of the desperation of the ruling elements in the United States of America because they want, at this moment of the capitalist crisis, to abrogate the basic democratic rights of the citizens of the United States of America. And we must understand that this killing of George Floyd took place at a moment of the convergence of the health pandemic, militarism, economic depression, racism, chauvinism, xenophobia. And we should remember that it was precisely at a similar moment in 1933 that brought the fascists to power in Germany. So the progressive forces internationally, especially the United States of America, must be conscious of what this moment means in the period of global capitalism and the centrality of the military in the reproduction of white supremacy, white racism, and international capitalism. The United States military, for the past 20 years, have spent over $6 trillion fighting unjust, endless wars in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Libya, in Somalia, and supporting their proxies in wars against the people of Yemen, trying to launch wars against the people of Venezuela, against the people of Cuba. So we are in a situation where global militarism, as its reflection in the urban areas in the United States of America, because the same National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, which was used by the United States Congress to launch the wars in Iraq and elsewhere, under the same law, the United States government has passed on billions of dollars to the police department to keep down Black people. So today, when we remember George Floyd, we are also naming the names of the more than 1,000 persons who are killed every year. Tamir Rice, Trayvon Martin, Freddie Gray, Sandra Bland, Eric Garner. The names are too numerous. Just Friday night, the police killed another Black man in the streets of Atlanta, Georgia. So the progressive forces in the United States of America are making the link between militarism abroad and militarism at home. Why is this militarism so pervasive at home in the United States of America? What is the position of the Black working peoples in the United States of America? After the Civil War in the United States of America, 1860 to 1865, at the beginning of the 20th century, Blacks moved into the urban areas when Black workers were needed. But in the era of deindustrialization, in the past 40 years, Black workers were not needed in the same way. So that the management of the urban areas required policing and the militarization of the urban areas in the same way as we have the militarization of the planet to keep United States capitalism going. And it is in this military management of the urban areas where the Black working people meet the brunt of the US military oppression. And we see this in the killing of Black youths every day. We see this every corner of the United States of America with the killing of Black youths. So mainstream politicians will talk about reforms and talk about how to make the police more accountable. But the leadership of the movement against capitalism and white supremacy has created a new political situation in the United States and internationally. The leadership is calling for the dismantling of the military in the United States, defunding the police, demilitarizing the Black community, and demilitarizing all public spaces. So we need to understand the demands of the youth, because the media, as one of the institutions of international capital, the NGOs, the public paid intellectuals will seek to distort what the Black Lives Matter stand for. So many people talk about Black lives, and I would want to say to my young brothers and sisters in Africa, what the Black Lives Movement stands for. What is important about the Black Lives Matter movement is who and which forces came to become the leaders of the Black Lives Matter forces. It's not by chance. That is our transgender brethren and sisters who have emerged as a leadership, because in the past 30 years, the Black church has been compromised by the conservative, homophobic forces inside the Black community that derailed the progressive liberation theology that existed within the Black spaces. So the Black Lives Movement emerged at a very decisive moment to oppose United States capitalism. How is it that in the country, in the world, that is supposed to be the most technologically advanced, that when a small virus like COVID-19 emerged, that in this country where 2 million people are affected and over 110,000 people have died, that 60% of those people who have died are Black and brown peoples. It is in this context that we have to understand the centrality of the Black Lives Matter movement and to see the demands of the Black Lives Matter movement. I want to spend a minute so that we can direct you to studying the platform of the Black Lives Matter movement. In 2016, in the midst of the political campaign between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, in August, the Black Lives Matter produced their 6-point document. And it is important that people understand the 6-point document, because many of our brothers and sisters in Africa and elsewhere support Black Lives Matter without going to support the program of Black Lives Matter. Number one, the Black Lives Matter movement is calling for ending the war on Black people and the criminalization and dehumanization of Black people. Number two, the Black Lives Matter movement is calling for reparations, past and present crimes, including redlining, the reformulation of cultural and educational institutions. And in this light, we have seen all over the world people calling for the removal of statues like Cecil Rhodes, Christopher Columbus, King Leopold, and all of the images of white racism or white supremacy. Number three, invest and divest. To invest in housing, to divest from the military establishment, to invest in universal health care. You will notice that in the political campaigns of the mainstream politicians, in the midst of the COVID-19, they will not discuss the need for universal health care and the fact that it's the Cuban medical system that is pointing the leadership of the world in how we fight COVID-19. Number four, economic justice and reconstruction. Number five, democratic community control. Number six, political power, independent Black political power, and Black self-determination. Now, it is very important that we understand that although as the Black Lives Matter has proclaimed the leadership, the progressive forces in all other sectors of the population understand the importance of these platform and this platform. Hence, we see young, progressive white youths in all parts of the country, from the environmental justice movement, the peace movement, the gun control movement, the LGBT movement, the anti-immigration race movement, the anti-Islamophobic movement. The Black Lives Matter have created a unique political force to fight against capitalism at this particular historical moment. So we are now seeing how the state is seeking to respond to this crisis of capitalism. They have, in the past 3 months, given themselves more than $6.3 trillion. How is it that the federal government of the United States of America can give $6.3 trillion to capitalists to bail them out when the majority of the masses of the people in the United States are continuing to suffer, dying from COVID, unemployment, with a food crisis? Let me repeat myself. If the economists are saying that this crisis is deeper than the Depression of 1929, and it will be more profound than the crisis of 1929. If the 1929 crisis brought us the intervention of imperialism in Ethiopia, brought us the rise of fascism, brought us World War II, what will be the outcome of this crisis of capitalism? We have already seen with the intervention in Libya and the wars against the people of Iraq, Iran, China, Cuba, Venezuela, that the military instincts of capital is to resolve the crisis of capitalism by military means. So the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States of America, the movement of peace and justice, is calling on peoples in all parts of the world to remove and oppose US militarism, US white supremacy, and US capitalism. What will be the response if the United States intensify its plans to invade Venezuela, Cuba, Iran, China, and other parts of the world? In the Black Liberation Movement, the Black Lives Movement in the United States of America, the people have made it very clear that they will intensify the opposition to capitalism, and that the mobilization of the people is to do what is being done in Seattle, in Minneapolis, create spaces of safety for the people so the people have control and democratic control over their communities. The struggle against capitalism, the struggle against racism requires a new level of political consciousness, new levels of solidarity, and new forms of organizing. And it is part of our responsibility to those who have gone before us to ensure that the capitalists cannot resolve this financial and economic crisis by killing millions of people. Already, millions are dying from COVID-19 when the technology exists and the scientific and medical wealth exists to be able to resolve these questions. This discussion should be part of a general struggle for the dignity of people fighting racism, capitalism, and white supremacy.